Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something a bit different. We're not just focusing on one biography.
No.
Instead, we're kind of tearing through a whole stack of sources, looking for the common blueprints, the shared DNA that defines the American mogul.
That's right.
We're trying to look past the individual success stories, really, and find those universal patterns of power, wealth, and maybe most importantly, strategic control. We see it in historical figures, modern titans, the works.
Exactly. And our mission today is all about synthesis. We're drawing lines from 19th century industrialists, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, building steel and oil fortunes, all the way to the 21st century architects of private equity, complex finance, even global logistics.
Oh, wow.
And what keeps jumping out is this powerful duality. On one hand, you have this genuine, sometimes revolutionary entrepreneurial vision, but it's almost always existing in this constant tension with, well, a nearly relentless quest for absolute control. Sometimes coercive control over markets, organizations, even civic life itself.
Okay, so that's a big theme. Vision versus control, or maybe vision through control. And to unpack this huge pursuit of control, we've got a plan.
Good.
First, we'll dig into the foundational philosophies. Think early American fortunes, Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, what really drove them personally. Second, we'll shift gears. Jump into the modern era. Look at the mechanics of leveraging capital in crisis. That means, the shadowy 1980s arbitrage networks, the super efficient strategies of private equity giants.
Right, the modern playbook.
And finally, we'll break down the architecture of influence, scandal, and political control. We're talking dark money networks, manipulating infrastructure, even managing global logistical chaos. It's quite a scope.
It really is. Should be fascinating.
All right, let's start at the beginning. Andrew Carnegie, the man who literally wrote the book, or at least the essay, on the gospel of wealth. We all know the steel fortune, the libraries.
Icons, yeah.
But the sources really ground his whole philosophy, his whole approach in a moment of intense, almost existential fragility.
Oh, absolutely. You can't understand Carnegie's obsession with control without knowing that context. It's non-negotiable. Just before his brother, Thomas, died tragically young from pneumonia, Carnegie himself had this terrifying brush with death.
Oh, okay.
He was diagnosed with malaria incorrectly, it turns out, but he'd actually contracted typhoid fever, fell into a near coma. Imagine that. This intense illness hitting almost exactly the same time his brother dies. It created this profound, really lasting fear of losing control, and it made him rely incredibly heavily on the very few people closest to him.
Wow. So facing that kind of personal trauma, that near-death experience, how did that translate directly into how he ran Carnegie Steel? I mean, this was the largest industrial corporation of its day.
It made him just recoil from the standard corporate model completely. When his partners, guys like Henry Phipps, were pushing him, let's structure this like a real corporation, bring in outside money, diversify ownership, Carnegie fought back hard. Oh, yeah. He believed the secret of our success, his words, was doing the exact opposite of what Wall Street wanted. He trusted his tight internal circle. The people forged through loyalty, personal connection, not some anonymous external shareholders.
So he actively rejected outside capital. He preferred this almost paternalistic partnership model. It sounds like it wasn't just about business structure.
No, not at all. It was a deeply personal system of loyalty baked right into the structure.
How so?
Well, his philosophy was pretty explicit. He believed that next to his actual family, his young partners, the up-and-comers in the firm, had the greatest claim upon the old fellows, meaning himself and the senior guys.
Okay.
He didn't want these young partners struggling to buy their stock out of pocket. He argued against that. Instead, the deal was they'd pay for their stock out of future dividends.
Clever.
Very, because it tied their personal success, their future wealth, their absolute loyalty, directly to the long-term performance of Carnegie Steel, which, of course, he tightly controlled. It was basically a structural way to institutionalize that intense loyalty he craved, especially after coming so close to death.
And that deep control, maybe even coercive control, it didn't just vanish when he sold the company and turned to philanthropy, did it? His famous library donations, we think of them as pure benevolence.
But they weren't. Not entirely. It was, you could say, philanthropy weaponized. He actually, and openly, referred to his library giving as a bribe.
He called it a bribe. Seriously.
Yes, a bribe to cities and towns. And the condition wasn't some minor detail. He insisted that the community had to agree to tax itself forever, to pay for the building's maintenance and upkeep.
In perpetuity, wow.
Exactly. His real goal, the sources make it pretty clear, wasn't just to give them a building. It was, and I quote, to force the communities to do so, to compel public officials to adopt his preferred civic funding model for perpetual education.
So he's using his private fortune as a lever, dictating public finance, civic organization, all based on his specific vision of how society should improve itself. It's like the origin story of what we call philanthrocapitalism today.
Absolutely. And it sets the stage perfectly for his great contemporary, John D. Rockefeller, who took that kind of singular vision and applied it with, well, a chilling, almost abstract ruthlessness.
Rockefeller,
Yeah.
Standard Oil. The consolidation is legendary, of course, but it was done with a level of cold calculation that apparently unnerved even his own peers back then.
Oh, definitely.
Our sources point to this cryptic quote he supposedly gave his former employer, Isaac Hewitt, who was questioning the whole consolidation plan.
I asked that quote. It's legendary because it just perfectly encapsulates the huge difference in how they operated, how they saw the world. Hewitt was rooted in traditional business, couldn't really grasp the sheer scale, the complexity of what Rockefeller was planning.
And Rockefeller's response,
Basically, I have ways of making money that you know nothing of. It just hinted at this whole other level of strategic planning, of complexity that went way beyond the existing norms of commerce at the time.
and the ultimate proof of that, the sort of iron fist inside the velvet glove, was how he used his deal, his combination, with the railroads. He used that leverage not just against, faceless rivals, but with absolute impartiality.
Impartiality is exactly the right word. Rockefeller got his dominance by leveraging these deals with the railroads. He used them to pressure competitors, squeeze them, ultimately force them to combine with Standard Oil. And he applied this pressure with zero emotional restraint. Didn't matter who it was.
Even family.
Even against a firm where his own brother, Frank Rockefeller, was a partner. It wasn't personal dislike or malice. It was just economic imperative. Anyone standing in the way of the consolidation, regardless of relationship, was subject to the same, almost scientific destruction.
Looking at the sources, I find myself wondering, was it really impersonal? Or was that detachment just a very successful psychological justification for what were, let's face it, incredibly aggressive business practices? Ida Tarbell, his most famous critic, she tackled this directly, didn't she?
She did, and she definitely saw the nuance there. Tarbell described him as, quote, utterly and almost as impersonally ruthless as a whirlwind or a torrent. Strong words.
Very.
But then she immediately clarified. She said he was too intelligent to be dismissed as just a brute, a Hun. She kind of placed him above the normal moral fray. She argued he was someone who basically suspended the ordinary laws of society for himself.
So, not driven by petty greed.
Not according to Tarbell. It was more like a singular, abstract passion for economic domination. His genius, his entire focus, was dedicated solely to Standard Oil. That incredibly focused, almost scientific approach to creating a monopoly. That's the blueprint he left behind.
Okay, so if the 19th century moguls built their empires on physical stuff, steel, oil, railroads, the modern mogul seems to build power out of more abstract things. Capital, information, asymmetry. Let's jump ahead. The 1980s. Kind of the crucible of modern financial engineering, right? That whole arbitrage ecosystem swirling around Drexel, Burnham, Lambert.
Absolutely. That era really represents the professionalization of information control, the entire world of risk arbitrage, epitomized by figures like Ivan Bogesky. It was all predicated on one thing, getting crucial information just moments, sometimes seconds, before the rest of the market.
Speed was everything.
Speed and access. Take the relationship between Bogesky and Richard Mulherin. Mulherin was this massive stock block trader.
Right. I remember reading he was intensely private, hated the limelight, shunned those arrogant, pompous investment bankers, refused press interviews.
Exactly. Very reclusive in that world. Yet he apparently spoke to Bogesky daily, multiple times a day sometimes.
So why? Why was that particular line of communication so vital, so open, when he shut everyone else out?
Simple answer. Money. Boesky became Mulherin's firm's single largest customer, generated enormous trading commissions for him.
Ah, okay, follow the money.
And in exchange for that business, Mulherin provided the ultimate asymmetric information. Because as a major block trader, Mulherin knew not just what stocks were being bought and sold in huge quantities for takeover targets, but he knew the identity of the buyers and sellers.
Yeah.
And crucially, their intent.
And the intent, that's where the real edge was, right?
Right.
Not just knowing a buy order came in.
Precisely. Knowing who was buying was actually more valuable than knowing what they were buying. Was that massive purchase coming from a known hostile bidder gearing up for a raid? If so, the stock price was probably about to explode upwards. Or was it coming from, say, a state purchaser, like a state retirement fund, just doing some routine portfolio adjustment? In that case, the stock was likely to just sit there, maybe drift a bit. That difference, knowing if the buy order signaled a threat or just business as usual, that was pure arbitrage gold. Bogaski could leverage that tiny bit of knowledge into massive, almost risk-free, instantaneous profits.
It's just astonishing the institutional power this whole network wielded. Even when the SEC felt they had an overwhelming case against Michael Milken and Drexel, the firm just refused to cooperate. They kept going.
Their defiance was really a testament to Milken's raw market power.
Yeah.
The SEC strategy, presumably, was to apply pressure, thinking clients would get spooked and abandon Drexel, forcing the firm to settle.
But that's not what happened.
The exact opposite happened. Milken's control over the junk bond market, which was the lifeblood, the source of capital, for so many of his clients, was so absolute that those clients stayed loyal. They were just as defiant as Drexel was. So Drexel just kept completing massive deals, billion-dollar deals. The threat of indictment was just looming out there, but it couldn't actually stop the machine. It was incredible.
That ability to essentially defy regulatory power through sheer financial momentum, that seems like a defining trait of the modern mogul. Okay, let's fast forward again, maybe 20 years. The 2008 crisis and the rise of private equity, specifically someone like Stephen Schwarzman at Blackstone. He seemed to understand that organizational control was the absolute key to survival.
Oh, completely. Schwartzman's approach really reveals a deep study of why organizations fail, especially financial ones. When Blackstone was going public, he laid out these 3 non-negotiables for the IPO, and they were all centered on maintaining absolute control.
Okay.
The second one, and maybe the most telling, was his insistence on retaining, get this, 100% control over people and compensation within the firm.
100%. After an IPO, why was that level of control over pay so critical to him?
Because he looked at history. He specifically looked at disasters like the collapse of Lehman Brothers just a few years earlier. He believed, and the sources support this, that firms fracture when individual leaders start prioritizing their own personal wealth over the collective good of the organization, or when they feel unfairly compensated compared to their peers, leading to resentment and infighting.
Right, the bonus culture complaints.
Exactly. By retaining absolute total control over who got hired, who got fired, and critically, who got paid what, Schwarzman aimed to prevent those inevitable internal conflicts. He wanted to stop the infighting that he saw kill other institutions. For him, control wasn't just about investment strategy. It was fundamental organizational risk management, keeping the firm unified, unlike the fragmented warring factions he saw play their rivals.
And that tight structural control then positioned Blackstone perfectly for the massive capital crisis that hit in 2008 when Lehman finally did collapse. The market reaction then was, well, it showed pure systemic panic, didn't it?
Oh, the reaction was instantaneous and frankly terrifying, which, ironically, is precisely the sort of chaotic environment that private equity, if it's well prepared, is built to exploit. You had money market funds, things people considered as safe as putting cash under a mattress, suddenly breaking the buck, dropping to like 97 cents on the dollar. That hadn't happened in recent memory. It signaled that even the bedrock of short-term finance was cracking.
And even stranger, investors were so desperate for safety, they were actually paying the government to hold their money.
Exactly. The yield on U.S. Treasury bonds went negative. Think about that. People were knowingly paying a premium, guaranteeing themselves a small loss just for the perceived safety of government-backed debt. That is the textbook definition of irrational fear driving markets. And Blackstone saw it coming. Schwarzman called it the nuclear winter, and they prepared.
So their strategy was basically hoard cash while everyone else is running for the hills.
Textbook crisis investing, yes. Schwarzman immediately ordered the firm to call down all its bank credit lines, amass this huge war chest of cash. He explicitly referenced historical data. He knew that investments made when the economy was weak have performed best. He pointed to buyouts done in previous troughs like 91 and 2001, saying they earned double the returns of deals done in other years.
So he had the plan.
She had the organizational control, he had the capital ready, and he had the historical perspective to buy assets aggressively when the entire global economy seemed paralyzed by fear.
This deep dive into leveraging financial weirdness, financial anomalies, and outright crisis, it leads us pretty naturally to the extreme end of the spectrum, manipulation, like the yen LIBOR scandal involving the market maker Tom Hayes.
Ah, Tom Hayes,
Yeah.
famously dubbed the George Soros of the yen market. He operated with this almost toxic mix of undeniable talent and extreme self-regard. As a market maker, technically, his job was to facilitate the smooth, proper functioning of the market, provide liquidity.
Right, keep things orderly.
But in that largely unregulated ecosystem, market makers often viewed themselves with this kind of smug self-satisfaction. The attitude was basically, we are the market.
And Hayes wasn't just facilitating, was he? He was apparently so aggressive with his own trading positions that he actually gained the ability to nudge or maybe shove the market to his own advantage.
His influence became palpable, yes. The sources say he could sometimes skew the market so significantly that it led to these really unusual phenomena, like the standard relationship between the 3-month and the 6-month yen LIBOR rates actually inverted, flipped upside down.
Which shouldn't normally happen.
Exactly. It was a profitable anomaly for Hayes if he was positioned correctly, but it also demonstrated the immense, frankly unchecked power that a single individual could wield in a critically sensitive global benchmark market.
And unlike the, perhaps, more subtle information asymmetry we saw in the 80s with Boaseski, the sources make it pretty clear that Hayes' manipulation wasn't exactly a closely guarded secret among his peers.
No, it was disturbingly normalized, it seems. Colleagues were apparently fully aware that Hayes was routinely asking friends at other banks for favors on the daily LIBOR fixings, trying to get them to submit rates that would benefit his trading positions.
People knew this was happening.
Yeah. One coworker even noted, according to the sources, that Hayes asking for these favors was embarrassing because it made their bank appear to manipulate others to suit our position. The knowledge was there, the discomfort was there, but the internal checks and balances, or maybe the will to enforce them, just seem absent. It suggests a broader culture that maybe tolerated or at least turned a blind eye to this individual exertion of will right up until the regulators finally managed to piece together enough evidence to prosecute.
So this relentless pursuit of absolute control, whether it's in the industrial age or the financial age, it often seems to rest really precariously on the personality of the mogul themselves. And if that control fails, or if the personality is flawed, the collapse can be spectacular. We see a kind of perfect illustration of this duality, maybe, in the contrasting management styles within the Gucci family.
Oh, the Gucci family drama is a fantastic case study. It really highlights control through sheer personal force versus, well, control undermined by personal fragility. You had Aldo Gucci, the patriarch. He exercised absolute control through this almost tyrannical cult of external perfection.
How far did that tyranny extend? What does that look like?
Down to the tiniest details. There's a story in the sources where Aldo was so obsessed with presentation, with the image, that he once instantly canceled a store's franchise contract. Why? Because he found a speck of dust on a shelf during a visit.
Just like that.
Dust. Just like that. His control was meant to be all-encompassing, demanding perfection from everyone around him, all to uphold the carefully crafted image of the Gucci brand.
Okay, so that's one extreme. But then when his successor, Maurizio, took over, that control just seemed to crumble. Not because of external forces necessarily, but because of his own internal character flaws.
Exactly. Maurizio Gucci apparently suffered from what the sources describe as a fragile, insecure personality. He seemed incapable of direct confrontation, which meant he couldn't make the hard decisions that leadership requires.
Like firing people.
Right. He'd rely on aides, on intermediaries to deliver bad news, or even fire long-term loyal employees, rather than doing it himself. This failure of personal resolve, this inability to face difficult situations head-on, it meant that any attempt he made at exercising architectural control was constantly undermined. It just made the organization chaotic, unstable, and ultimately vulnerable.
That kind of fragility, that failure to really master reality, it leads us, I think, directly to the Theranos scandal, which was essentially a massive failure of scientific control, all wrapped up in this incredibly compelling revolutionary promise.
Oh, Theranos is the ultimate cautionary tale there. They claimed they had mastered complex medical diagnostics using just minuscule capillary blood samples. You know, the tiny drop from a finger prick.
The Edison machine, yeah.
But the fundamental science was flawed from the start. And this was laid bare in expert testimony during the trials.
The core problem wasn't even necessarily the fancy machine itself, was it? It was the blood sample.
Precisely. The expert testimony hammered this point home. Capillary blood, the stuff you get from a finger prick, which Theranos relied on, is inherently, quote, polluted by fluids from tissues and cells. These extra fluids interfere with the chemical assays, the tests themselves. They make the measurements significantly less accurate, less reliable than standard venous blood drawn from a vein in your arm. They were trying to build this technological marvel on a fundamentally contaminated foundation.
There's that quote from the lab expert describing just how impossible Holmes's claims really were. It perfectly captures the sheer audacity of the deception.
It really does. When this expert was asked about Theranos' claim of achieving revolutionary testing results from fingerprick blood, he said he would be, and I'm quoting here, less surprised if they told us they were time travelers who came back from the 27th century than if they told us they cracked that nut.
Wow. Time travelers would be more believable.
That's how scientifically implausible the core claim was to people who actually understood the field. It emphasizes that the company's entire premise was recognized by scientific peers as basically impossible with current technology. Yet somehow, the illusion of control, the marketing, the personality, it persisted for years.
And the regulatory system, at least initially, seemed to struggle to catch up. Their attempts to get approval often just exposed more of their own weaknesses, didn't they?
Absolutely. The company suffered this really embarrassing public setback when FDA inspectors forced them to withdraw a highly publicized application for a Zika virus test. And the reason wasn't some super complex technical flaw in the chemistry.
What was?
They had failed to include the most basic, standard patient safeguards in the design of their study. It was a failure of fundamental procedural control, of basic competence, and frankly, honesty. And that kind of failure ultimately led to severe legal consequences, especially from investors who claimed, quite rightly it turned out, that they were deceived by a series of lies, material misstatements, and omissions.
Okay, so moving from the collapse of scientific control to the deliberate architecture of political dominance, let's look at the modern political mogul. The Koch network is often cited as a prime example, masters of leveraging dark money for ideological control.
The scale of the Koch network's investment in shaping the political landscape is just staggering.
Yeah.
And that scale allows for the near instantaneous deployment of political force when they choose. Just look at the numbers.
Oh.
Between 1998 and 2008 alone, Charles Koch's private foundation gave over $48 million in tax-deductible grants.
$48 million.
And overwhelmingly, that money went to groups promoting his specific libertarian political viewpoints. This wasn't, neutral charity work. It was highly strategic funding, explicitly aimed at maximizing political leverage and shifting policy debates.
And the timing of their political actions could be surgically precise, couldn't it? Almost immediate.
Oh, the response to the Obama administration taking office is a perfect example. Just 48 hours, 2 days. After President Obama was sworn in, the Koch-funded advocacy group, Americans for Prosperity, was already organizing nationwide porculus rallies.
Porculus, right, that term Rush Limbaugh popularized.
Exactly. Rallies specifically designed to attack the economic stimulus package before it was even fully debated or implemented. This wasn't some organic grassroots uprising bubbling up from nowhere. It was an instantaneous, highly coordinated deployment of a fully funded pre-existing network designed specifically to shape the public narrative right out of the gate before the opposing policy could even gain traction.
And that immense political capital, built up over years, it translated into real-world results inside Washington, didn't it? It demonstrated the coercive power that this kind of non-traditional, often opaque political financing can wield.
It certainly seemed to. The network was incredibly effective at empowering and amplifying the voices of what the sources call the radical rightists in Congress, supporting their campaigns, providing talking points, leveraging their ideological momentum. This allied support base became so formidable, so influential within the Republican Party, that these groups, heavily backed by dark money advocacy, were ultimately credited with effectively forcing the resignation of the sitting Speaker of the House, John Boehner, back in 2015.
Forcing out their own speaker.
It really shows how political control can, in effect, be outsourced to these external networks and then deployed strategically, even against the established structures of government itself.
Now, for the historical parallel in achieving that kind of deep political and civic dominance, often behind the scenes, we almost have to turn to Robert Moses in New York City. He perfected the art of institutional manipulation, didn't he?
Oh, Moses is the masterclass. His power was so phenomenal precisely because he rarely held the official top elected job, yet he controlled practically everything related to public works and infrastructure in New York for decades. He's proof that real control often bypasses formal titles and elected office.
Give us an example.
Okay, public housing. Between 1945 and 1958, New York City built over 1,000 public housing structures, 1,082 buildings to be exact. The New York City Housing Authority was technically in charge, but according to the sources, not a single site for any of those buildings was selected without Robert Moses's personal approval.
Even though he wasn't even on the Housing Authority board.
Never a member. Didn't need to be. His influence was absolute through other channels, other leverage points.
And he used these calculated maneuvers, these power plays, to constantly expand the scope and the financial stability of the agencies he did directly control, right? Often by sort of manufacturing a crisis to justify a takeover.
The takeover of the Tunnel Authority by his Triborough Authority is the classic example of this tactic. Moses controlled the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, this massively profitable toll-collecting empire, flush with cash, virtually untouchable. He wanted to absorb this separate tunnel authority, which was building things like the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, but he needed a pretext.
So what did he do?
He used analysis generated by his own hand-picked experts to publicly declare the tunnel authority was in a financial mess. He asserted loudly that its construction bonds would never be resaleable at face value, that it was heading for default.
So he basically engineered a narrative of impending financial doom for the other agency.
Precisely. By projecting this image of financial failure, even if it wasn't entirely accurate, he created the perfect political opening. His powerful, independent, revenue-generating Triborough Authority could then step in, looking like the responsible savior, to rescue the supposedly floundering Tunnel Authority. This maneuver consolidated massive infrastructure projects and, critically, their debt-free revenue streams under his complete autonomous control, shielding his power even further from public scrutiny and political accountability. Pure bureaucratic genius, in a ruthless sort of way.
Okay, our final mogul for today takes this concept of logistical control and applies it not to a city, but to the chaos of the entire post-Cold War world. Victor Bout, the so-called merchant of death. He saw a massive opportunity in the cracks and the lack of global governance, didn't he?
Bout's genius, if you can call it that, was purely entrepreneurial and logistical. He became the absolute master of delivering weapons, heavy weapons sometimes, to rebel armies, pariah states, regimes controlling lucrative natural resources in conflict zones. Basically, he flew where legitimate carriers absolutely refused to go.
Dangerous business.
Extremely. But he made his operation sustainable, even profitable beyond the arms deals, by ensuring his fleet of aging Soviet cargo planes was always generating revenue, even on the return trips.
Right. He mixed the illicit arms trafficking with legitimate business. That's how he built up those tidy fortunes the sources mentioned.
Absolutely essential to his model. The arms flights themselves were obviously lucrative, paying in diamonds or cash or whatever. But those big planes cost a fortune to operate and maintain. They needed to earn money flying back, too. So Bout used them for completely legitimate cargo runs, like shipping frozen chicken from South Africa, where it apparently cost about $1 per bird, to Nigeria, where you could sell it for $10.
10 times the price. Nice margin.
The very tidy, legitimate profit on basic commodities.
Yeah.
And that regular income stream provided the financial cushion, the flexibility he needed to fuel the expansion and maintenance of his extremely high-risk, illicit weapons delivery service on a global scale.
And his incredible success, his ability to operate for so long, really relied on one simple, maybe depressing fact. The world powers, the big players, they just didn't seem to care enough to actually stop him.
That's arguably the ultimate enabler of his long run of control over that niche market. The UN could, and did, implement these name and shame campaigns against arms trafficking violators like Bout. They'd publish reports, issue condemnations.
But did it work?
According to the sources, these campaigns generated virtually no sustained attention, and more importantly, no real action from the global superpowers who actually had the means to intervene. As a result, the only price Bout really had to pay for years was, quote, a small dose of public embarrassment. He thrived in that vacuum of enforcement. He essentially redefined global logistics for the underworld, catering to the world's outcasts, and became the undisputed king of weapons delivery in that chaotic post-Cold War era. Hashtag outro. So when we stand back and look across this really vast timeline of American moguls, from the 19th century titans, your Carnegies and Rockefellers, building industrial empires, through to the modern architects of finance like Schwartzman at Blackstone, political influence wielders like the Koch network, even global logistics masters of chaos like Victor Bout, the synthesis, I think, becomes undeniable.
What's the core thread?
It's the immense, often incredibly aggressive deployment of individual will to fundamentally control the environment around them. It takes different forms, sure, whether it's coercing entire cities to tax themselves for libraries, or leveraging tiny bits of asymmetric information for billions, or demanding 100% IPO control to prevent internal dissent, or even manufacturing financial crises to seize autonomous public power. In every case, their vision isn't just realized, it's enforced. It's weaponized into coercive control over people, politics, and markets.
The entrepreneur's vision not just happening, but being made to happen forcefully. Well, thank you for joining us on this quite revealing deep dive.
It was my pleasure. A fascinating set of connections.
And before you go, we always like to leave you with one final provocative thought to chew on. Andrew Carnegie, as we discussed, was and still is widely celebrated for funding libraries, ostensibly to improve society. Yet we know he explicitly viewed that act of benevolence as a bribe, a specific mechanism designed to force public spending and enact his vision of civic change. So here's the question. If the world's most powerful philanthropists today use their colossal fortunes, their giving, not just for traditional charity, but as explicit strategic levers, just like Carnegie did, to compel governments, communities, maybe even international bodies to adopt their specific policy goals or strategic visions. Does that fundamentally change what we mean when we talk about benevolence? Or is that kind of coercive philanthropy simply an inevitable blueprint, maybe even a necessary tool that comes with truly immense wealth and the ambition to reshape the world? Something to think about.